cornering is simple, right? Well, no, I think it's actually really complicated. There's things like line choice, steering, braking, where to put your weight. So today we're going to break it apart and look at the one thing I think is actually fairly easy to fix and also super important, and that's where to put your weight whilst cornering. Moving your weight around on the bike is obviously super important, and it's the one thing that maybe beginner riders don't do enough, or sometimes it's something that catches them out, particularly when braking and cornering. So I always think about your weight on the bike as your hips. It's probably a little bit more complicated than that, but when I'm looking at someone and trying to coach them, I'll look at where their hips are on the bike, and that can tell me an awful lot about what you're doing when you're riding. So if you're sat down on the saddle pedaling, your hips are therefore above the saddle, and actually with your bum touching the saddle, your center of gravity is quite high. So when it comes to cornering, the first thing to do is to get your weight off the saddle and stand up. That puts the pressure down on the feet. Of course, your hips are still in the middle of the bike if they're above the saddle, but that's when you can start thinking about moving them around when it comes to entering turns. So when you go from seated, standing, that takes the pressure from your seat to your feet, gets that center of gravity lower. And if you can, then move your seat down as well to give you that room to move your weight around. Obviously on a cross-country bike, you might have a static post. Does make it much harder to get a good cornering technique. So I'm rolling down a fire road. I'm going to show you where my weight is. I'm making really simple, small turns here, and I am stood up, so the pressure is through my feet. My hips are above the saddle because it's not very steep downhill at all. So my weight is through my feet, but still quite high on the bike. And that technique works absolutely fine. If you're riding a trail that's maybe bumpy or there's some rollers, you need to stand nice and tall. So you've got that movement and suspension in your arms and legs to soak up the trail and deal with that technical terrain. And if the trail is quite grippy and you're not near the edge of that at all, then that technique works fine. However, if you're trying to ride faster or you need all the grip you can find, that's when you need to start thinking about ways to lower your center of gravity. Step one of lowering your weight in a corner is to drop your outside foot. So I will actually pedal forward for one and pedal back half a turn when I'm trying to weight the outside foot. As well as actually putting it down there, I'm trying to actually pressure that foot as much as possible. And that makes your bike super stable. Think about a Formula 1 car cornering versus a 4x4. The lower the center of gravity, the better when it comes to turning. It's really easy to practice this technique as well. So find yourself a big, wide open space, car park, a fire road, and just think about your outside foot each time. That really should start to feel natural after a little while. It almost feels a little bit like skiing where you do this with your outside feet. Hopefully that becomes natural, and then you can start to think about other parts of your weight. Like I said before, hips is telling me where most of your weight is, but now if you want to balance your weight a bit further forward, you can actually bring your chest down to the bars. That is really good if you've got a really loose or slippery corner where you want to get a little bit more grip on the front tyre. Obviously if your front tyre slides, that tends to be the one that makes you crash. So I'd rather have a little bit more grip on the front tyre, and if it needs to be a little bit less on the rear tyre, I can get away with that. And the way to do that is just to bring your chest down towards the bars a little bit. Warning, you can't use this technique all the time, like I've kind of said already. If the trail doesn't suit this technique, then that's the tricky part about cornering. You've just got to improvise and make it suit as best as possible. If you've got a flat, gravelly turn where you're trying to find the most amount of grip possible, get your weight as low as you can, bias the front wheel a little bit. However, if you hit a big berm and it's a big compression, you need to go back to standing with your feet level. So if you've got a really solid platform, you can't think about dropping your outside foot quite so much. So from one extreme to the other, there'll be little sort of dollops of each in between. If a corner is fast, there's a bit of a compression, but you need to find grip, then maybe you do a little bit of a drop of the foot and maybe not go the whole way. So it's up to you to practice this technique first, out somewhere simple, get your friend to film you. It's really easy to look at your feet, where your hips are, what your chest's doing, and try and find where your weight is. Plus, the bike you're riding and how it's set up is really going to determine how much grip you've got. So I'm riding a Canyon Spectral, 150mm of travel, so it's going to track the floor pretty nicely on most trails. I've got Vittoria Mazda tyres in trail, so not the softest compound enduro tyres, but big chunky tread on this. My pressures are 28 PSI rear, 25 PSI up front, and I know how much grip, I've got a good guess how much that tyre's gonna grip for me personally. I've also got my suspension set up correctly, so get your sag about right on front and rear, so that you know you're not gonna start dipping in really heavily onto the front wheel, and that's gonna mess around with your weight mid-corner. The other thing I find I'm really sensitive to is the handlebar height. So when I'm in my attack position, how low or high do my bars feel? And that kind of affects how I distribute my weight on the bike, or how comfortable I feel putting weight further forward. This bike, brand new to me today, very lucky, but it does feel to me like the bars are fairly low on the front end. So I'm having to commit a bit of weight to that front wheel, and it doesn't feel so good. It feels a bit more committed than I want. So for me, I think I'm gonna add a slightly higher rise bar just to bring my arms up a bit higher. That's gonna make me feel a bit more comfortable and a bit more like I can commit weight to the front wheel when I need to in the turns. Now to the trickiest part of moving your weight around in corners. And it's also one that I see a lot of riders don't do quite as well as they could, which means that you can improve it. Maybe you watching this could improve this one. And this is moving your weight side to side mid-turn. So most of the time, again, I'll give you a caveat at the end, this doesn't count for everything, but most of the time, you wanna try and get your weight to the outside of the bike. So I'm going over there, I've dropped my outside foot, I'm leaning the bike over, I'm steering, all those things happen naturally. You don't really have to think too much about the steering and the leaning. But now, if I'm leaning with the bike, my hips are directly above the saddle. So what does that tell me? It tells me your weight is in line with the bike, and therefore, if I dropped a plumb line from my hips, it's kind of to the inside of the bike. So we can change that by actually moving your hips to the outside of the saddle. And now the plumb line that goes down through my bike frame, and it's much closer. If we're looking at where my tyres are contacting the floor, the plumb line is now here and not over there. So getting your hips to the outside of the bike, there's a few different ways of thinking about how you do this. I like to think about what my arms are doing. So if I'm sat in line with the bike, my arms are straight. However, if I pick my outside elbow up, going towards the right angle there, that is dipping the bike over, and the saddle is also now dropping down the inside of my thigh. So that's another different way of thinking about it, is your dropped saddle moving down the inside of your inside leg. Again, I can practice it on a nice fire road, so when I'm doing this, I can look down, I can see the whole side of my bike, so my weight is obviously to the outside. Definitely practice this. Many riders are good at doing it one way, but not the other. So try and think, again, if you can, stick your GoPro on a tripod, get your mate to film you, have a look at where your hips are, if your elbow's coming up, and practice it both ways. You can see from my outside foot and elbow position that now my hips are also steering into the turn. So that's another different way of thinking about it. If your elbow or leaning the bike over doesn't work, think about steering with your hips, and hopefully that should work for you. Okay, so all those techniques like I've just talked about are very good most of the time. So weight low to the outside, dipping the bike over, great for flatter corners when you're trying to find grip. However, sometimes you might end up on the complete opposite of that, so your weight is hanging off the inside. Happens quite a lot when you're crashing mid-corner. Your tyres are over there, you get your weight off the inside and then they slide out and you're down and on the deck. However, sometimes you do need to use it to your advantage, and it's a bit like something called counter steering. Not all corners are perfect, and you don't always get them perfect yourself either. So sometimes if I'm coming into a corner, I'm gonna go that way, but I've messed it up, I've hit a bump, my weight's got upright or it's got to the outside of the bike, I can't get my weight going the way I need it to. That's when either you can counter steer, so I'm turning away from the corner I'm going into, and then I can get my weight to the inside and get myself going the way I need to. And as soon as my weight has come off the inside, I'm muscling the bike over, I'm getting the bike pointing in the direction I want, and then I can get back and set it where I want it to be, low to the outside of the bike. But sometimes you need to muscle your bike, and that's where I think about getting my weight to the inside to initiate that corner. Either by just putting my weight there, or doing a bit of that and a counter steer is going to help my weight come to the inside, and then I gather it back up and get the weight back where I want it to be. Although this is in the air, this is quite a good shot of what I mean by me getting my weight to the inside of the bike, then makes the bike move over to the left-hand side. Okay, students, that's all the theory. Hope you've been keeping notes. Now let's see how that translates to the imperfect world of the trail. Okay, example A, I've got a typical bike park berm where you're coming across the hill and it turns back on itself. So halfway through the turn, you actually sort of come in with the fall line of the hillside. There's a lot of grip in this corner and I start off nice and pretty central above the bike, as low as I can though, but mid corner, it does tighten up. So I will then possibly get my weight slightly to the inside to muscle the bike over. And then on the exit, I'm looking for grip, so I'm getting low and to the outside. Example B, this corner is actually much more consistent than the previous berm. There's lots of grip, there's no major compressions in this corner. So to go as fast as possible, I'm gonna obviously enter with a lot of speed, and then I can get low, lower the outside foot and angle the bike over to try and find maximum amount of grip. Now we've got a big, quite complicated downhill corner. Way up there, you start turning in and there's loads of roots that you've got to be on the right line for one, but also I'm going to be up level-footed, standing quite tall, so I'm probably going to have to do some little hops to skip over those little roots to maintain my line so I don't slip out. And then mid-corner, again, I've done a bit of turning by then, I've angled the bike in a little bit probably, but a lot of this corner, I'll be stood quite tall and quite central above the bike, except for down the end where it's critical to sort of get across the hill, and that's where I'm gonna then start angling the bike over, getting my weight to the outside. But there's an awful lot going on in this turn, and it's not just one technique the whole way around. Okay, so cornering is pretty complicated. Hopefully that's going to let you get a little bit better at it. If you've got any questions, leave them down below in the comments. And also use the hashtag AskGMBN and then I'll pick them up and try and answer them in the next episode of that. So thumbs up if you enjoyed watching this video.